So I was 18 when I did that protest. I did a few other protests around that time where I got arrested, but that was the biggest one. That was the one I spent, I think, like 2 nights and 3 days in jail. So,
oh my gosh,
we went all out. We brought barrels and we had chained ourselves to the barrels to cut off access to the entrances. So it was a big deal.
You are here for a reason, but navigating this human life can be challenging. How do you care for your body, mind, and spirit to make the most of your time here on Earth? How can you harness your incredible human potential? In this podcast, we explore these questions and more to help you craft your best life yet. Welcome to I Am Human. Welcome, humans. I am your host, Dr. Yami, and I am so happy to be here with you. Thank you for subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing this episode. We appreciate your gift of time and effort. To be human means to learn to ignore our intuition and our inner knowing so that we may continue to act from our human mind. But it also means to relearn how to connect with our intuition and that quiet guidance from our soul. My guest today, Meredith Walters, teaches these powerful concepts through her beautiful fiction writing. For as long as she can remember, Meredith Walters, author of This Animal Body, has wandered in forests looking for animals and magic and writing stories about what she found. Her life adventures have included volunteering for a nonprofit in Mexico, studying literature at UC Berkeley, getting an MBA, and working for a social enterprise startup. Her short story collection, The Adventures of Little One, was published in 2018. Today, Meredith lives in Atlanta, Georgia, working as a life and career coach, helping others rediscover their lost magic, and once again writing stories about what she finds on her wanderings through the woods. In this episode, we talk about her beautiful book, This Animal Body, what inspired her to write it. And we also talk about how much of this story actually reflects her own life and her own beliefs. We talk about her journey to her current way of eating, what she hopes people will take away from the book, if she found it difficult to write some parts of the book where she has to reflect upon animal cruelty and suffering, why she thinks humans struggle so much with connecting with their intuition and their higher selves, and how we can learn to connect to our intuition, our souls, how we can learn to reconnect with nature. It's a beautiful conversation. I know that you'll appreciate it and that you'll take away lots of beautiful nuggets of wisdom from this conversation. I also hope if you like to read fiction, that you pick up her book, This Animal Body. It's very well written. It's very beautiful. It's a story that I still have with me in my heart. And I am so glad that she wrote it. So I hope that you will also pick up a copy and learn some of these concepts through this beautiful story. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you so much. And now let us welcome Meredith Walters. The information on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to replace careful evaluation and treatment. If you have concerns about your health or well-being, please consult a healthcare professional. Meredith Walters, welcome to I Am Human. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk. Yeah, thanks.
Well, before we started recording, I told you that you're the first fiction author I've ever had on the podcast, but I'm super glad that I am going to talk to you about your book. So I have this is the advanced copy here, This Animal Body. I just love your book. Great job. And is really fun for a change to read a fiction book instead of having to do all the scientific, nonfiction books that I read for my podcast. So I appreciate that. Congratulations on writing such a beautiful, touching book. What inspired you to write This Animal Body?
Oh, thank you so much for that. Yeah, so the real kind of the moment of inspiration came when I was on my way home from a walk through the woods near my house, and I saw this robin on the sidewalk, and there was something so knowing and deep and penetrating, just wise about the robin's eyes. And I thought in that moment about all of the hierarchies that we humans tend to put ourselves at the top of. We're the most evolved, the smartest, the most capable. And in that moment, looking into the robin's eyes, just none of them made any sense. So this idea for a story came up that would reverse the hierarchies and show kind of a different perspective. Um, and at the same time, around that time, I was becoming very aware of just how much we humans have separated ourselves from the rest of the natural world and how much pain that has caused the beings of the natural world as well as ourselves. And in particular, for me, that pain showed up as anxiety and depression. And so I wrote the book also as kind of a love letter to my younger self and the things I wished I had known when I was in the midst of that struggle and that suffering. And really, kind of at the heart of it is how it can be beneficial to see anxiety and depression not as individual flaws or defects, but really as a healthy response to an unhealthy world. It's kind of like the pain of touching a hot stove. It brings our attention to where it's really needed. And when we are paying attention and we're listening, I think when we listen to it, not the loud voice of hopelessness, but the kind of the quiet heartbreak beneath the despair, that when we listen to that, it can help us find our way back to connection to ourselves, to other people, and to the wider living world.
Yeah, I love that. I love how much compassion comes through when you write this story and you're showing us these themes and these concepts. There's a lot. I'm a pediatrician, so I encounter a lot of things like that, anxiety, depression, but also even just ADHD and autism, some of the things that we are seeing higher prevalence of and higher diagnosis rates of. But the way that I explain it to patients and their families is that ADHD is just a brain difference. It's just a different way that your brain works. But because we have the world set up in a certain way, like you go to school and you sit there for 7 hours and you have to sit and pay attention and do things in a certain way, it can seem like it's a disorder. But I do like that different way of looking at things. And I found that for myself, that's true as well. I call it my inner donkey. So I'm really good. I'm type A, very driven. I am very good at pushing past my feelings and ignoring everything. But my donkey will stop me in my tracks. And it's also depression for me. So whenever I'm going in the wrong direction, pushing too hard, doing things that probably aren't aligned with what my soul really wants, but what my human brain wants, my donkey will stop all that. And I feel like it's like Eeyore, like it will just sit there and you cannot make it budge. It's like, nope, I am not moving until you align yourself in the right direction and you pay attention to what's going on. And so now I know when I have that feeling, I'm like, oh, my donkey's out. Okay, what's going on? Sit down, reassess. Where am I not aligned with where I should be headed in this lifetime? So I love that perspective. Thank you so much for presenting that in the book.
Yeah, no, thank you for the inner donkey. I love that. That's a great way of relating to it. And it's so true. It's such a loving presence at the core. It's so painful and it's also so loving. And I think of it as this kind of fail-safe mechanism because me and my human brain, I'll come up with all kinds of ways to go off track and do things that aren't quite right, for me. And I could live my whole life going down the wrong track, but yeah, that part of me won't let me. And it's this really wonderful way of keeping me to where I'm supposed to be, where I can be happiness, where I can contribute my best, where I can have the, greatest impact and best experience. So it's really a lovely thing. It's just not always very pretty.
Yeah. And what I like to say too, because so many of us are service oriented, mission driven people that want to help the world. But what I say is that the best way we can help the world is through our own joy and peace and contentment. And so sometimes we feel like we have to do so much, but really it's going inward, centering ourselves and radiating that joy. And sometimes that means pulling back and doing less to give more, which is very counterintuitive, especially in the American culture.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we have such a cult of productivity here. And yeah, I mean, this is where the natural world has been such a great teacher to me, because if you look at all the animals going about their business, they're contributing huge things. You know, the bees are pollinating the flowers and helping plants continue and reproduce, that there will be plants in the future. Squirrels are bearing acorns that turn into trees. None of them are doing it from a place of sacrifice and martyrdom and, like unhappiness. They're just being who they are. They're doing what gives them joy. And in doing that just being who they are, that's making a huge contribution. So it's a really great lesson for me to have learned, also as a type A person who pushes and overachieves and feels like I should always be doing more.
Yeah. And I love how animals, they have their rest time too. I
Hmm.
mean, they do their things to survive and what they need to do, but then they lounge around, they play, they enjoy
Yeah,
their time. You can tell that they're enjoying themselves as well. And I think that's a good lesson for us to learn as humans too. So
totally.
we
And
don't
with
just have to be grinding all the time.
totally, and with zero guilt, taking a nap in the middle of the day. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about how this way of thinking evolved for you, especially your connection to animals and nature. Is this something that you've had your whole life since you were a child, or did you discover this as you grew up?
Yeah, as long as I can remember as a child, I've loved animals. It's always been the fastest way to make me cry is to show me an animal suffering. And even like as young as 8 years old, I started writing stories about animals and the ways that I saw them treated that I didn't like. I wrote a story about a hunter who was taken on a journey to live as a different animal for a week, for a different animal every week until he realized that the animals were his friends, and just lots of stories like that. And then it just kind of continued on from there as I learned more about the world and how we treat animals and the different types of connections that are possible with them. Um, yeah.
And has it, and at what point has it affected your way of eating?
Yeah, so pretty much, well, when I was 12, I went to camp and sat at a table with a counselor who was vegetarian, and I was fascinated. So I was asking her all these questions about it, and she explained to me, that she didn't eat meat because of the animals, and she liked animals. And as soon as I realized that the animals that I loved were the same animals that I was eating, I couldn't keep eating the way I was. So I went home and promptly announced that I was not going to be eating any more red meat. I knew it was too much to give it all up at once. I kind of had that sense that that wasn't going to work for me. So I gave up red meat. And then a year later or so, I gave up chicken. And then a year later, I gave up turkey. That was an interesting year explaining to people why I ate chicken, but not turkey. Um, Nobody got that. But yeah, and then I gave up seafood about a year later. And then by the time I was, I think, around 17 or 18, I went fully vegan, and was fully vegan for about 10 years. So it was a, somewhat gradual, but started as soon as I kind of made that connection. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny how it's so normalized to eat meat that it can take us a while to realize that there's a connection with our plate, you know? Like, it's just like, this is separate. We don't even see it connected to an animal sometimes. And so when I've heard stories about kids happily eating their food until someone tells them, well, don't you know that that's a cow? And then stopping in their tracks and being like, wait, what? You never told me this. Like, what? And then be like, okay, that's it. I'm not eating this ever again. You know, it's just like so interesting how we're able to separate those things.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the problems in our culture is how disconnected we've become, that we see what we eat as coming from the supermarket rather than from an animal, which, if you're going to eat from an animal and you make that connection, then there's gratitude and reverence and lots that we miss out on when we just see it as something separate.
Yeah. And I know that there's lots of ancient cultures and ancient traditions that have put that, they still eat animals, probably a lot less than we do. But when they do, there's still that acknowledgement. Like, you had to sacrifice your life for me. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. You know, but there's still that feeling. And now it's kind of like we're like, no. We own you. We can do whatever we want to you. We're entitled to treat you however we want. It doesn't matter. So it's like a very different attitude towards animals and raising animals for meat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit more. I'm just curious about your spiritual beliefs and how that has evolved over time. Do you feel like your connection with animals has affected your spirituality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think when I was young, I just implicitly felt the spiritual connection to the natural world. Um, it just felt kind of magical to me, and like anything was possible. And I felt connected, I think, to the deeper parts of myself, kind of not so much my fears or flaws or personality. It was that larger kind of true nature that I felt when I was out in the natural world, but I didn't have the language for that. And then when I got into high school, I started to lose touch with those parts of myself, and I got more into, academics and achievement and sports and the things that I felt like I should be doing and achieving. Um, and I really lost touch with the deeper parts of me and kind of the things that were my core, including my connection to the natural world, including writing. I actually, after writing a bunch of stories when I was young, I stopped writing completely for a time and completely lost touch with it. And Yeah, and so it was I had to take a real journey back. Which in some ways, I think about like all those last years, but in other ways, I think having to come back to it after losing it for a time makes me really appreciate it and value it and know how to find it, in the moments when I've lost connection with my soul or, my spirit or spirituality. I know how to get back to it now because I've had to kind of make my way back. And that was a big part of my healing with depression and anxiety, was just reconnecting with the natural world and getting to know the beings in it, just going on the same paths every day and seeing the same trees and the same rocks and streams and lizards and spiders and just forming relationships with them, because eventually, they started to feel more familiar and they were more like neighbors and then friends and then eventually family. And so I think creating those connections and feeling like I was part of something larger than myself, this web of life, feeling like I have a place in it. I'm always connected to it. I have a role to play, a purpose in it, things that I can contribute to it, was really, really healing. And then again, also connected me to that deeper part of myself again, which is so, so important for anxiety and depression.
For sure. And I feel like that was a big theme in the book too, is finding your way back after you've been lost, after you've lost touch with your intuition, because I think a lot of us do unlearn that connection with our intuition in so many different ways in life. But one of them probably is that soul connection, that spirituality that a lot of people feel like they're missing, that they kind of forgotten how to access.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're definitely trained out of it. I think we come into the world just in touch with our intuition and we act from it and it's part of who we are. And then we're trained, not to listen to it, not to pay attention to it, to cut ourselves off from our bodies, to spend all our time in our minds and solve all our problems in our heads. And yeah, we're trained out of it, unfortunately. So it is a process of relearning and unlearning to get back to it.
Hmm. So I really admire artists of all kinds because I don't consider myself an artist. Like I just love musicians and painters and writers and people who can create this. So I'm just curious to ask you, like, how much of what you write is inspired by your own experiences? Like how much do you draw from yourself? How much of yourself are you putting into these stories?
Yeah, for this one, it was a lot. I think, part of the reason that I stopped writing for those years was that when I was 12, I wrote my first novel with a 12-year-old's logic. I was like, I'm going to write a novel, no big deal. And I did. And it was easy, no problem. And I was so excited about it. I loved it so much that I entered it into my school's book contest, which anyway was kind of designed for more picture books, but it came back with the second to lowest score possible, and so I was devastated, and that was part of what kept me from writing for so many years. So to come back full circle and have an idea for a novel and believe that I could write a novel again, this time, as a 30-something-year-old, was a big deal. And so it was really helpful to be able to bring base it on my own experiences a lot. That gave me a lot more comfort. So love of animals Frankie has is definitely, as I said, from my experience. I was never a neuroscience student, but, was continually shocked and saddened by the way I saw animals treated around me. Did actually go to jail for an anti-fur protest. So that part came from personal experience. So not everything in there is mine, but a lot of it is.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And it's so heartbreaking that the way that your book was perceived and evaluated stopped you from writing. And I think that happens so much in life, that we have this gift, but because of how other people perceive it or the comments they make, it may shut it down, my husband's definitely not an artist, but I will say that one thing that he will never forget, and I don't even know how teachers can do stuff like this, but I guess it was like second grade or something. He was little, okay? Like, you don't expect second graders to be like professional artists, but I guess they had to draw and paint an apple, and he did his, and the teacher came back and told him that is not a perfect apple. And then it was like he had been proud of his apple. And I'm wondering, I was like, you never know, babe. You could have been some kind of world famous artist, but her comment, that was it. You're not going to paint ever again, So I think especially for children that they're so fresh and so impressionable, we do have to be really cautious about what we say, because to us, it may seem like whatever kind of comment, but to them, it can stay with them for lives. And not just children, adults too. But I just heard so many stories like that of people who had a gift and they suppressed it for so long because of how others perceived it or how they judged it.
Yeah, it's really common, and it is really heartbreaking. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think a lot of us would act differently and do things differently if we had the confidence to do it, and I'm sure that that's something that you deal with. And, coaching is that lack of confidence for a lot of humans.
yeah.
What do you hope people will take away from the book?
Yeah, there's a few things. So one is just a sense of hope that no matter how bad things seem, how much suffering there is, there's always a path to healing. And it's different for everyone, and we have to learn how to recognize what it is for us. So I tried to include some kind of clues to how we might recognize it. Um, And then the second thing I hope people take away is a sense of belonging. There's so much isolation and alienation and loneliness in the world. And I think a lot of it comes from how disconnected we've become, in part from the natural world. So I think when we recognize that we're part of this just vast, beautiful, incredible, awe-inspiring web of life, we're connected to it. We have important things to give to it. Like, I think when we just acknowledge that and start paying more attention to it, we start to realize that no matter where we are, we're never alone. And no matter how imperfect we are, we're always loved. And so that real deep felt sense of belonging is something that I was hoping to give folks. And then the last thing is for people with depression. Just I hope that they get the sense that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, and it's you're sensitive, and in our culture and the way things are now, that can be really painful, and a lot of people cannot understand it. It can even challenge a lot of people, but it's really a good thing, and it's a gift. Um, and I think sensitivity brings a lot of compassion, and oh my goodness, the world needs more of that. Um, and it also can help you find, map all the places you might have become disconnected, or all of the losses that still haven't been acknowledged or grieved, and find ways to acknowledge and grieve and reconnect. And the beautiful thing is that when you do that for yourself, you make it easier for everyone else around you to do the same thing. And so it's you do it for all of us.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I love all of that. And yeah, I always think whenever we live our truth, whenever we follow our path, we give other people permission to do the same thing. So the more of us that do that, the more of us that will do that.
Yeah.
So it's like a positive feedback cycle. So I think you're right about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, the book is written beautifully. I don't think it's too graphic or anything, but I think that you did have to pull up a lot of images that were probably difficult. Was it hard for you to write the book in parts where you had to reflect upon animal cruelty and suffering? Was it hard to get through those sections? Tell me a little bit about that process.
Yeah, it definitely was. And actually, when I was planning the story, I was kind of thinking about the characters and creating these characters that I loved. And then when I realized that something was going to happen to one of them, and I won't give away anything more than that, but I fought it. I was like, no, 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 that doesn't need to happen. I can find another way. And I tried to not have that happen. But stories, they have a life of their own, and you really have to respect it. And so at the end of the day, I had to accept that it was very clear that this is what the story needed and wanted. And so I did it, but I cried the whole way through writing it. I cried every time I revised that scene and edited that scene. It was really hard to get through. Yeah, and I also tried to show a different perspective on the scene. It's pretty critical to the book. I won't say more than that, but anyway, but it's not all bleak. It's not all bleak. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you approached it very well, and I think that there are a lot of things to consider when we're like really zooming out and looking at the big picture of everything. But I just loved because I didn't expect it. I loved how you turned things around, like you were talking about at the beginning of the interview on that hierarchy, because I hadn't ever thought of it that way. And it was so beautiful and refreshing. I was like, I love it. And that makes so much sense. And I want that to be true. I was like, yes, this is my new belief. That's going to be true for me. So, um, but yeah, that was just so beautiful. So,
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
let's
that's
go
wonderful to
ahead.
hear.
Let's talk a little bit about why do you think humans struggle so much with connecting to their intuition and their higher selves, like on a soul level, but even just like physiologically? Why do you think it's so hard for us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on this myself to try to get an answer for me. And there's, kind of three things that I've noticed in my case. And I think it's true for a lot of us. I've noticed it a lot in clients as well. But one is just our brains. They're so smart and clever and busy. And we're always thinking, worrying, planning, ruminating, fantasizing. We have so many thoughts. There's just no room for anything else. And, intuition is usually really quiet. It's kind of a whisper in my experience. And it gets even quieter when we ignore it for a long time. I think it's kind of like, oh, why bother? So it's just often we're not even hearing it because there's too much else going on. And then I think part of it is like we were talking about before, we get trained out of it. So there's that, just our cultural training and habits and things we learn. And then the last piece that I've noticed in me is fear, because intuition is often not logical or predictable. I don't know what changes it's going to ask me to make or what uncertainty I'm going to have to step into. Often other people don't get it. So then there's a risk, I feel like, of rejection or judgment. And there's not a lot of examples to follow. So it just can feel risky.
I think you hit all three of those on the head. That's so true. And I can totally identify with that feeling of fear, especially when it doesn't feel logical. It's not this calculated human thing, but you're just like, I just feel like this is the right thing to do, but I can't prove it. I can't prove that it's the right thing to do. And what if I'm actually wrong? What if this isn't my intuition? What if it's something else? And so I think then we just overthink and we get into this like crazy thing where we just like need to settle and go inward and listen and be like, okay, I'm scared, but I'm going to go this way, and I think a lot of times when people do that, they do find that it was the right way, even if it made zero sense at the time.
Oh,
That's so
totally.
interesting.
Yeah, some of the least logical things are the ones that had best results for me. And I find sometimes that can help, like tracking it. If you write down the decisions you made based on intuition and then write the results, it helps to remember, like, oh, right, good things happen when I trust this. But that's happened so many times for me, and I still doubt it. So but it's helpful to have that hard evidence.
Yeah, I like that to track it, because then you can develop even more and more trust in your intuition, even when it is scary. All right, I want to take a detour. And I just have to give a little spoiler because I was shocked, but I'm Panamanian. In the book, there is things that happen in Panama. So I want to know, why Panama? Do you have any personal experience with Panama?
Yeah. So when I was getting ready to move from San Francisco, where I lived for 15 years, back to Atlanta, where I grew up, I went right before moving. I went on a trip with my sister and her family to Panama that they had been planning, and I just kind of went along for the ride. And so my experience in the book is based on my time in the San Blas Islands and the Guna people there, the indigenous group of people who, have, as I'm sure fought to retain their autonomy and culture and succeeded. And so for me personally, it was an experience of, I was coming into it with I was in a very anxious time because I was about to make this huge, talk about intuition. I was following my intuition to move from a place where all my friends were, where I'd been for 15 years, back to a place where I only knew my family, hadn't lived for a long time, wasn't sure it was the right thing, but my intuition was pretty clear on it. So anyway, a lot of anxiety, and I wasn't sleeping well. This is where when I arrived at the San Blas Islands, I immediately just felt the people there, the connection to the natural world and to each other. And they were just so loving and so welcoming and so clearly connected to nature. My whole nervous system just immediately relaxed. I slept beautifully. I've had this strong sense of well-being and peace. And it was really transformative. And that scene or that part of the novel that you're talking about is a turning point, and important for Frankie to feel connection on multiple different levels. And so I wanted to bring her into a place where a really connective culture could help with that, and show the power that a connective culture can have.
That is so amazing. But I also don't know how you were able to synthesize the personality of Panamanians so quickly. Because I was like, the character that she met over there. And then, she started asking all these questions. I was like, yep, that's how we are. We're forward. We have zero boundaries when it comes to telling people certain things or asking them certain things. So I feel like I'm more American in some ways, that I'm definitely more like, I don't just, but man, when you're in Panama, there's like nothing off limits, either about your appearance or about anything. It's like, whoa, okay, you're going there. All right. So you hit that one very well as well. And I've actually never been to San Blas. And I think it's because we're from the interior. I always went straight to my grandparents every time. I spent going every summer to my grandparents' house. My cousins have been, but I haven't. But it's something that I've been wanting to do for such a long time. So when I was reading the book, I was like, okay, next time I go to Panama, I'm going to make it a priority. We're going to go to San Blas. I'm going to take my kids. Also, because one of the things that you mentioned in the book, which is true about San Blas, is they're suffering too. I mean, they're having problems with overfishing and, lots of issues there. So hopefully it's something that can be preserved. But just as time changes and climate change and everything, it's affecting their culture as well. So, but that
Yeah.
was really cool. Really cool that that was in there. And I was like, whoa, Panama, that's so cool.
I love
Okay.
that. I love that.
Well, let's move on, because it's very interesting to hear that you got arrested for a protest. So, tell me your thoughts about animal activism and animal rights protests. How old were you when that happened? And do you still have the same perspective on that type of activism? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was 18 when I did that protest. I did a few other protests around that time where I got arrested, but that was the biggest one. That was the one I spent, I think, like 2 nights and 3 days in jail. So
oh my gosh.
we went all out. We went all out. We brought barrels and we had chained ourselves to the barrels to cut off access to the entrances. So we were, it was a big deal. And San Francisco at the time was inundated by protests and was trying to, find a way to discourage protesters. We actually got charged with felonies, which, it's kind of a funny story, actually. This is a bit of a side note, but the defense was that we weren't trying to prevent people from going in. We were trying to get their attention before they went in, because it was a felony to block a public walkway intentionally. And our lawyers basically argued, there was a gap between the last person in the wall, and we would have had to be idiots to, not intentionally leave that gap. And the truth was, we were not intentionally leaving that gap, but we were just like, yep, we'd have to be idiots. So that was the reason we were found not guilty, or we didn't get the felony charge. Yeah. So yes, I might do some things differently now from a little older vantage point. But generally, I think activism and protests can be wonderful. They can have a really powerful impact. I think it really depends a lot on the energy and the intention of them. And a lot of them, are coming from a place of anger and blame and judgment and othering of people, blaming other people for the problems. And I think that, it has some benefits in terms of it helps people express their anger. It helps them not feel powerless. So there's that benefit. But in terms of having the kind of impact they're hoping on animals in the world, probably not so much. And that was what I kind of learned. It was more for us than for anybody else. When it's done from a place of love, then it can definitely help spread awareness and, stand up for beings who can't stand up for themselves. And so I've just kind of learned to look for that in any protests that I take part in.
Wow, what a story. So, okay, I'm curious about when that happened and you spent 3 days in jail. I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh. So, how did your family react? Did they think you had just lost it? What was everybody around you saying to you?
Well, my poor parents, I didn't tell them I was going to do this. So they just got a call from one of my co-organizers letting them know I was in jail. And then, I finally talked to them and they're like, we're hiring a lawyer. And I was like, no, don't. I wouldn't let them hire a lawyer. I wouldn't let them do anything to help. So I wanted to use the public defender because that's what the other people, in my group were doing. So, I feel really bad. I'm sure it was horrible for my parents.
They were probably so shocked. You're what? You're where?
Yeah.
What? You have the wrong Meredith.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, let's transition back again to talk about what we as humans can do to connect to our souls and guide us through life. And maybe talk a little bit more about connecting with nature. And I know this may sound too simple and basic, but I think some of us need tangible steps for that. So if you could give us some tangible steps, because so many of us are so disconnected, what kind of advice would you have?
Yeah, I love this question. And so a few things. I think for connecting with our souls, it's noticing what it feels like when we feel connected to our souls. So for a lot of people, it's a sense of peace or love, harmony, connection, inspiration, awe. Just noticing what it feels like for you. And there's often kind of a bigness to it for me. It feels like I'm larger than, the fears or the day-to-day stuff, not so overwhelmed or fragile. So noticing that, and then noticing what are the things that help me to feel that way. Oh, and particularly noticing it in my body too. I think the body is a huge resource for this. So what are the sensations in my body when I'm connected to my soul? And then what are the things that help? And so spending time in nature, is it for a lot of people, definitely for me, but it can also be, music, art, meditation, prayer, sometimes particular people or places or animals can help us, other beings can help us connect with our souls. So just kind of noticing what those things are and then making regular time for them. And I will come back to, as far as kind of connecting with nature, basic steps. I think for me, it was just going on regular walks through the same trails and getting to know over and over. now one of my favorite things to do is to be still. So I think earlier on in my journey, it would have been hard for me to be still for that long. So the walking was great, but now I just love being still outside in the same spot. So I get to know that same spot through all the seasons. I sit there for long enough and I'm still enough. The animals start to get used to me and they'll come closer and then I can get to know them. And I just try to be in my senses as much as I can. So really notice what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling on my skin or beneath my skin, the sounds, the smells. And that for me is one of the easiest and most enjoyable ways to connect with nature. And just learning about the beings. So I might see an animal and then be curious, where do they live or what do they eat? Where are they coming from? And so that helps me also build relationships and these cords between me and these animals, both the individual animals and the species. And then that leads to a whole lot more sense of connection. So yeah. And then going back to connecting with your soul, I think another piece is that's really helpful is noticing what it feels like for you when you're not connected to your soul, because we're inevitably going to lose that connection. And so what does it feel like in your body when you do? And for me, it's a sense of tightness inside or shallow breathing, not noticing what I'm feeling in my body, not feeling any sensations at all. I push, I overdo, I get grumpy and irritable, I get anxious and depressed, and so then I know that, okay, I've disconnected. So really paying more attention to my body, even pausing a few times a day and just checking in what's happening in my body. It's like closing a feedback loop. So it's like when we're not paying attention to our bodies, it's like the thermostat is outside. The house doesn't know whether it needs to be warmer or colder. But when we check in with our bodies, we're bringing the thermostat indoors. So we kind of have that automatic feedback loop and we'll automatically start to adjust. So I notice like, oh, I'm really disconnected from my soul. So then I'll start to, move towards the things that help me reconnect. And then lastly, I think, to stay connected to our souls, we can check in with our bodies and our souls when we're making decisions and just imagine the different options and see which feels more aligned, which feels more soul nourishing, which gives me the most positive response in my body. And then, acting on that is another way to stay connected to it.
I love all of that. I want to touch really quick on what you said about paying attention to how we feel and what we do when things are not right, when things are not aligned. And for a long time, I was kind of an irritable person and I thought that that's how I was. And I realized my default factory setting is actually one of joyfulness and lightheartedness and, laughter. And that when I'm irritable, it's because something is off. That's not my default setting. And so now I realize when I start to get grumpy and I'll just say it out loud, like, wow, I'm really irritable today. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm just maybe going to contemplate this or see. Sometimes it might just be as simple as like hormone shifting. And if that's the case, then it's just more of accepting that feeling and trying not to act irritable because I'm feeling a certain way, knowing that it's going to pass. But otherwise, if it's something that I've been pushing to the back of my mind, it's really trying to bring that forward and realize, okay, this is why I've been acting grumpy and irritable and snapping at people, because that's not the way I am. So there's something off here. But I think that's really important too, because sometimes if we feel bad for long enough, we start to believe that that's the way we actually are.
Yeah.
And so stepping back and being like, actually, that's not the way I am. I'm acting this way because something's been wrong. And sometimes it's been wrong for a long time. So I love how you brought that forward as well. I also want to say too that, I know you lived in San Francisco and some people live in big cities and there may not be a park nearby, but there's wildlife and there's wild things everywhere, even in small little parks right outside your window, there's birds and stuff. So even just getting outside and just sitting and being still and paying attention to everything around you, that's there that you didn't realize was there. I think that can be really helpful as well for people that may not have access to like the woods and the forest and the mountains. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I feel like super lucky and grateful that it's all in my backyard whenever I want to access it. But some people may not have that advantage.
Yeah, but you're right. There is always nature wherever we are because there's the sky. We always have the clouds or the sun or the moon and the stars. There's the earth beneath us. Usually there's some form of plant life somewhere we can find in the cracks. And even if it's just getting to know that one, plant that's coming up through the cracks of the sidewalk, there's a lot we can get from that. So yeah, usually it's a matter of noticing and paying attention more than having to get somewhere to find it.
Yeah. Okay. I love all of that. Well, Meredith, we're going to move on to the wrap up questions. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge you and I want to thank you. I feel like artists and writers don't get enough of this, but I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you wrote this book. I'm so grateful that you were vulnerable to write it and to go back to, your soul level that's saying, I want to write and I want to create these stories because we need it. And I do feel like when these themes and these concepts are written in a story, sometimes it impacts us even deeper than if we were to write it in a book that's like, this is how, your mind works. This is how, your emotions work. It's nice to know scientific basis or step-by-step things, but sometimes when we read it in these beautiful, rich stories, it really can impact us on a deeper level. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you and keep writing. Keep writing. So,
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
what do you wish more people knew?
I think it's really the same thing that I've been saying, just, how much pain of our pain comes from having disconnected from ourselves in the natural world. And just how there's always an open invitation to come back. Our bodies are always inviting us back. The natural world is welcoming us back, whether it's, like you said, the bird offering his song or the plant offering her berries or a creek inviting us in there. It's always inviting us back into our bodies and back into connection. It's always available to us.
Yeah, I love that. How do you define success in this lifetime?
I think for me, it's really doing my best to listen to my soul and listen to what the world is calling for from me. And then just to give what I can as best I can, no matter how incomplete, imperfect, flawed it may be, just to give whatever I can.
Oh, that's beautiful. Is there a goal or dream that has evaded you or something that you have left on your bucket list that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, well, I have to say publishing a book was a huge one. So that that one I'm really grateful to have had the chance to do. I'm really interested in learning actually how to track animals, to learn more about the animals around me. So I'm kind of starting on that journey, and there's a lot to learn about, yeah, tracking animals. So I'm excited
That's
about it.
so cool. So like out in wilderness, you mean like looking for the signs of where they went and that kind of thing? Is that what you mean by tracking
Yeah.
animals?
Although to your point, it doesn't even have to be wilderness. It can be a bridge, an overpass where a road goes over a creek or something. There's often lots of tracks there. I'm finding all the places where the animals are, even in the city where we don't even realize it because we don't see them, but they leave their tracks. So you can kind of find their stories, even if you're not there when they go by.
So cool. I love that. What does it mean to be human?
To be human to me is to be both flawed and brilliant, and both limited and limitless. I think, this is really oversimplified, but in some ways, for me, depression is about coming to terms with the things we've lost, and anxiety is about coming to terms with the things we will lose. So, I think anxiety is this really impressive human effort to come to terms with the fact, just the truth, the fundamental truth that we're going to lose everything we love, right? We're going to die. They're going to die. We're going to lose it, and we're powerless. There's nothing we can do to stop that. So what do you do with that? And I think in order to come to not get lost in the anxiety, what it requires is to find what cannot be lost. And for me, that is the part of us that's limitless. That's our true nature, pure love, whatever it is for you, our souls, but really finding out what that is for ourselves. I think most of us are pretty familiar with our limited selves. And it can be really, really helpful to get to know our limitless selves.
Oh my gosh, that's so profound, so beautiful. And yeah, I think that can be very reassuring because I feel like my whole life, one of the reasons I've crammed in so much is because I've always had, from the beginning, I've had this sense that I have very limited time. But once I really started believing that I'm eternal and that this is just one incarnation and I have like literally all of eternity to do everything I want, I calmed down and I was able to become more centered and more content right where I was, knowing that it's already been a magnificent, amazing journey. It's only going to get better. But I think that helped take that scarcity and that desperation out of it. Like, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this, because it never ends, actually. I'm going to be doing this for a long time. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. That's
beautiful.
beautiful. Yeah.
All right, Meredith, this has been fantastic. I've really loved getting to know you. I loved reading your book. I can't wait for more. So hopefully you have more in you somewhere after you take a little breather. And I hope that all my listeners grab a copy of your book, because I think it's very impactful, very beautiful, and I think they'll just love it. So This Animal Body by Meredith Walters. Thank you so much. Where can listeners connect with you? Also, if you could tell us a little bit about the services you offer as well and where they can find your book.
Sure. Thank you. So the book is available pretty much anywhere books are sold. So, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, although independent booksellers should be able to order it as well. It has widespread distribution. And people can connect with me at meredithwalters.com. I have resources there for free resources, as well as I offer coaching for folks who are wanting to find their calling and their soul purpose in life. And then, the book is another way to connect.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate everything you do. Keep up the great work. And I hope that you have a very plantastic day.
Thank you so much. I am Meredith Walters, and I am human.
Thank you for listening to another episode of I Am Human. I would be so honored if you subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. We love our listeners and take your feedback seriously. If you have questions or constructive feedback, you can email us at podcast@dryami.com. That's podcast@doctoryami.com. I am your host, Dr. Yami Cazorla-Lancaster. I Am Human is produced by myself and Alejandra Parra. Graphics designed by Alejandra Parra. Music by Angela Soph with Glowbox Productions and edited by the Castos production team. Remember, human, you are here for a reason. Have fun, explore, and live your life to the fullest.